The Grand Rotunda was the largest structure ever built by living hands. It floated in the darkness of space, orbiting a dead star, and inside its hollow belly sat the representatives of 4,000 species. They came from every corner of the galaxy. Some breathed oxygen, some breathed methane, some did not breathe at all, but they all came here to talk, to argue, to make deals, and to pretend that they were civilized. On this particular day, the chamber buzzed with the sound of 1,000 alien languages being translated at once. The matter on the floor was small. Two species, the Thisk and the Rari, were fighting over a patch of empty space near the frontier. It was the kind of argument that happened every week. Nobody cared very much. Delegates checked their devices. Some slept with their eyes open. Ambassador Dreen Salt, who a tall insectoid creature with black shining armor and forearms folded neatly across his chest, sat in the speaker's chair and let the arguments wash over him like warm water. He was already thinking about dinner. Then the old one stood up. He rose from the lowest tier of the chamber, from a seat so far in the back that most delegates did not even know it was occupied. His name was Irth Val, and he was the last of the Kethsari. His body was thin and bent like a branch that had carried too much snow. His skin was almost see-through, and beneath it, veins of soft blue light pulsed slowly like a heartbeat made visible. He was 12,000 years old. He had watched stars die. He had watched species rise and fall like waves on a shore. And now he was standing, and the chamber did not know what to do with him. I invoked the voice of the eldest when he said. His words were quiet, but the translation systems carried them to every ear in the room. The effect was immediate. Conversation stopped. Delegates looked at each other. The voice of the eldest was an ancient law, older than the concordance itself. It gave the oldest living being in the chamber the right to speak, and no one could stop them. It had not been used in 3,000 years. Most delegates thought it was a myth. Ambassador Salt leaned forward. His mandibles clicked with irritation. Honored elder, he said carefully, the chamber recognizes your right, but perhaps this matter could be raised at a more appropriate. Sit down, Ambassador Urith Val said. There was no anger in his voice. There was something worse. There was patience, the patience of someone who had waited a very long time for this moment. Salt sat down. Old Kethsari walked slowly to the center of the chamber floor. Every step seemed to cost him something. A young Adidari woman sitting in the chronicler's booth leaned forward and activated her recording device. Her name was Maven, and she had been assigned to record the day's proceedings. She had expected nothing. She did not know that she was about to hear the most important story in galactic history. I want to tell you about a species. Val began. You will not remember them. That is the point. He paused and looked around the chamber. Thousands of eyes, some with pupils, some without, stared back at him. They were called humans. A few delegates murmured. Most showed no reaction. Name meant nothing to them. It was a footnote in a history file that nobody read anymore. But in the upper tiers, among the oldest delegations, there was movement. The Pori ambassador shifted her seat. The Drothai delegate suddenly found something interesting on the floor to look at. They knew, they remembered, and they did not want to be reminded. 800 years ago, evil continued. A species from a small yellow star on the edge of the spiral arm built their first faster Then light engine, they were young, they were curious, they were so eager to meet us that their first message to the galaxy was a song. He paused, a song. Not a weapon, not a warning, a song. He let that sit in the air for a moment. They came to this very chamber, they stood where I stand now, and they asked to join us, they asked to be part of our great civilization, and we said yes. His bioluminescence flickered, and the light beneath his skin shifted from blue to a soft gold. They were wonderful, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. They made things, art that made you feel emotions you did not have words for, music that could make a Drati weep, and the Dranathi have no tear ducts. They cooked food for species that did not eat, just so those species could understand the concept of sharing a meal. They were generous in a way that embarrassed us. They gave more than they took. They trusted more than they should have. He stopped walking. He stood perfectly still in the center of the floor. We called them the Bright Ones. Silence held the chamber. Maven's hands were trembling over her recording device. She did not know why. Something in the Old One's voice had reached into her chest and squeezed, and then Evil said the Verkath came. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Every delegate knew the Verkath. The dominion of the Verkath had been the galaxy's nightmare for 1,000 years. A predatory empire ruled by a species of armored giants who believed that the strong had not just the right but the duty to consume the weak. They had conquered a quarter of the galaxy before the Concordants found a way to stop them, not through war, through a deal. The Verkath demanded territory. Irethvol said they demanded a buffer zone between their space and ours, a sacrifice, something to chew on so they would leave the rest of us alone. His light turned cold, a deep icy blue, and this chamber, this great was civilized chamber, voted to give them what they wanted. He turned slowly, looking at each delegation in turn. You gave them humanity's home. The words hung in the air, in the upper tiers. The Poly ambassador closed her eyes. The Dratha delegate was no longer looking at the floor. He was looking at the door. It was a secret vote. Ireth Val said the humans were not told. They were not consulted. They were not warned. One morning they woke up and the Verkath were in their sky. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were wet. I was there. I watched the human ambassador come to this chamber. She ran through those doors. She was bleeding. She stood right here, right where I stand, and she begged you for help. She said there were children on those worlds. She said the oceans were boiling. She said they were burning alive. His voice was barely above a whisper now, but the translation systems made sure every word reached every ear. And do you know what this chamber did? He looked at Ambassador Salt. You adjourned the session, Salt said. Nothing. His mandibles were still. His 4 hands were flat on the desk. You closed the doors and you went to dinner. And outside those doors a species died. Ireth stood in silence for a long moment. Then he spoke again, and his voice was different now, harder, colder. 12 worlds burned, 8.7 billion lives ended. The last transmission from Earth was a child singing, a little girl, 7 years old, sitting in the ruins of her city, singing a lullaby into a radio that she did not know was broadcasting to the entire galaxy. She sang until the fire took her. Maven was weeping. She did not try to hide it. Tears ran down her blue-green skin and dripped onto her recording device. The survivors Fled, Val said, 200 million out of billions. They ran into the dark, into the abyssal reaches where no species goes because there is nothing there but dead stars and cold, and we let them go. We sealed the records, we erased their name from our histories, we forgot them. He turned back to the chamber, but I did not forget. Ambassador Salt cleared his throat. Honored elder, he said, and his voice was smooth and practiced. This is a tragic chapter of history, and the concordance acknowledges the unfortunate events of the past, but this is a matter for historians, not for the act of assembly. If perhaps we could arrange a formal testimony for the archives. I am not here to give testimony for your archives, Val said. I am here to give you a warning, something. And his voice changed. It was not grief anymore, it was fear. They did not die out there in the dark. I know this because I have listened for 800 years. I have listened to the silence between the stars, and the silence has changed. It used to be empty. Now it is full of something patient, something that has been waiting. He looked at Salt with those ancient wet eyes. They are coming back, and you are not ready. Salt smiled the way powerful people smile when they want a problem to go away. I think the elder needs rest, he said to the chamber. Let the record show that his testimony is noted and appreciated. Now, returning to the matter of this Grillari border dispute. Val turned away from the podium. He walked past Maven's booth and stopped. He looked at her, she looked back at him. Through her tears, write this down carefully, child, he said. They will need it when the silence ends. He walked back to his seat in the shadows. The chamber returned to its business. The border dispute continued. Delegates argued about coordinates and mineral rights. Everything was normal. Then a fist communications officer burst through the side door. He was running. His scales were pale, which meant he was terrified. Speaker Salt, he said, and his voice was shaking. 17 frontier relay stations have gone dark. Salt frowned. Malfunction? No, sir, no malfunction, no. Distress signals, no debris. They are simply gone, all 17. I simultaneously. The chamber went very quiet in the back row in the shadows. The last of the Cathsari closed his eyes. His bioluminescence pulsed once, a deep sad gold. It begins, he whispered. Nobody heard him, nobody ever did. 800 years before the relay stations went dark, the sky above Earth turned red. The Verkath did not announce themselves. They did not send diplomats or make demands. They simply arrived. 600 warships dropping out of faster than light travel in a ring around the small blue planet. Their hulls black and scarred from a 100 conquered worlds. Each ship was the size of a mountain. Together they blotted out the sun. The humans had 47 military vessels. Most of them were patrol ships designed to watch for asteroids. Their largest warship, the UNS Defiance, it was barely a tenth the size of the smallest Verath cruiser. It did not matter. The Defiance fired first. Captain Arav Singh, a man with gray hair and steady hands, gave the order from his command chair. He knew he was going to die. Every person on his ship knew it. They fired anyway. The Defiance's missiles struck the lead Verkath dreadnought and left a scar across its bow, a scratch on the skin of a giant. The Verkath did not even bother to target the Defiance specifically. Their fleet simply fired in all directions at once, and the Defiance, along with 31 other Human ships ceased to exist in the span of 4 seconds, but the remaining 16 ships did not run. Civilian transports rammed themselves into Virkath engines, mining vessels launched their drilling equipment like missiles. Ernie, a passenger liner carrying 3,000 people, aimed itself at the bridge of a Virkath battleship and accelerated to full speed. The pilot's last words broadcast on an open channel were, "Tell my daughter I was brave." It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. The bombardment of Earth lasted 6 hours. The Virkath used kinetic strikes, rods of dense metal dropped from orbit at tremendous speed, each one hit with the force of a nuclear weapon. Cities disappeared. Mountains cracked. Oceans began to boil along the coastline, sending walls of steam into an atmosphere that was already choked with dust and ash. By the 3rd hour, organized resistance had ended. By the 5th hour, most communication networks were dead, but one signal kept broadcasting. It came from a broken radio tower in what had once been Buenos Aires, and it carried the voice of a 7-year-old girl named Lena Vasquez. She was sitting in the rubble of her apartment building. Her mother was beside her, but her mother was not moving anymore. Lena did not understand what was happening. She did not know that the radio tower was still working, or that her voice was being carried across every frequency to every ship and every station in the solar system. She was afraid and alone, so she did what her mother had always done when she was afraid. She sang. It was a lullaby, a simple one in Spanish. Her voice was small and it shook, but she sang every word across the system, on evacuation ships and hidden stations and the bridges of the last few surviving military vessels. People stopped what they were doing and listened. Many of them wept, some of them screamed, and then the signal cut off. Hanom, and there was only static, and Earth was gone. The Virkath moved outward. 12 human colony worlds fell in the next 3 weeks. Some were bombarded, some were invaded on foot by Varath soldiers, 8-foot-tall creatures in bone-white armor, who killed with mechanical efficiency. The colonies fought, every single one of them fought. Farmers with mining tools, teachers with improvised explosives, children threw rocks at armored giants. None of it was enough, but they fought because they were human, and humans did not know how to do anything else when their people were dying. When it was over 8.7 billion people were dead, the species that had come to the galaxy with a song had been nearly erased from existence. Nearly 200 million survived. They were the ones who had been farthest from Earth. Deep space miners on frontier colonists, crews on long-range exploration ships. They gathered in the chaos and the grief, and they made a decision. They would not surrender. They would not beg the Concordance for help, because the Concordance had already shown them what its help was worth. They would run. They ran into the abyssal reaches. Every species in the galaxy knew about the abyssal reaches. It was a vast region of dead space on the far edge of the spiral arm where stars had burned out billions of years ago. There was nothing there but cold rock, rogue planets wandering without suns, and black holes that swallowed light and gave nothing back. No species had ever colonized it because there was nothing to colonize. It was the galaxy's graveyard, and humanity fled into it like a wounded animal crawling into a cave to die. The Virkath sent pursuit fleets, and they followed the human ships into the Reaches for 3 months, then they stopped. Their sensors could not track the humans. In the darkness, their ships were not built for the strange gravitational currents that twisted space between the dead stars. One by one, the pursuit ships turned around and went home. The Verketh High Command sent a message to the Concordance: the human problem has been resolved. The Concordance sealed the records. The name human was removed from the active species registry. Within 2 generations, most species had forgotten they ever existed. The bright ones became a footnote, then a rumor, then nothing at all. But in the dark, something was growing. 800 years later, till Fleet Commander Oresh stood on the bridge of the Concordance warship, vigilant, and stared at what was left of Relay Station 17. The station had not been destroyed. That was the part that bothered him the most. Orsh was Rari, a species of tall-scaled beings built for war. He had seen destruction before. He understood destruction, debris and scorch marks and shattered metal. These were things he could read like a language, but this was different. Every component of the relay station had been taken apart, not smashed, not melted, not blown to pieces, taken apart with the care of a surgeon removing organs from a body, circuit boards separated from their housings, power cells removed and drained, antenna arrays disassembled into their individual rods and laid out in neat rows, floating in the vacuum like a display in a museum. And someone had done this with great patience. Someone had wanted them to see it. Commander said his sensor officer, a young Rari with nervous eyes, "There is writing on the main hall plate," or leaned forward. "Show me." The viewscreen magnified the image. Letters had been carved into the station's hull, not with a laser or a cutting tool, but with something that had rearranged the metal. At the atomic level, the same message was written 4,000 times in 4,000 languages, one for every species in the Concordance. It said, "We remember," or felt something he had not felt in 30 years of military service. He felt cold. Over the next 6 weeks, 30 more relay stations went dark. The Navarra Raketh border fortress, the largest military installation in the frontier region, stopped responding to communications. The Concordance sent a scout ship. What the scout found made the pilot's report almost incoherent. The fortress was gone, not destroyed, gone. It had been built into a massive asteroid, and the asteroid had been hollowed out completely. Every wall, every weapon, every piece of machinery had been removed. Inside the empty shell, floating in the vacuum, were the personal effects of every Verketh soldier who had served there: dog tags, personal weapons, family photographs, letters from home. 2.3 million soldiers worth of belongings arranged in neat spirals like the arms of a galaxy. The soldiers themselves were found on a nearby moon. All 2.3 million of them alive, unharmed, stripped of their armor and weapons, sitting on the bare ground in perfect silence, staring at nothing, wounded, with expressions of absolute emptiness on their faces. When rescue teams tried to speak to them, they did not respond. Medical scans showed that their bodies were healthy, but their minds had been touched by something. Something had reached inside their heads and shown them things they could not stop seeing. It took weeks for the first soldiers to speak. When they did, they all said the same thing: "I saw what they saw when they died. I felt it, all of them, every single one." Back in the Grand Rotunda, the mood had changed. The delegates were no longer bored. The frontier was collapsing in a way that nobody could explain, and fear had begun to creep into the chamber like cold water rising around their feet. Val requested permission to speak again. This time, more delegates came to listen. Not because they respected him and because they were afraid, and they did not know what else to do. I told you they were coming, the old Kithsari said. He stood in the center of the floor again, his light pulsing slowly. You did not listen, you never listen. But I will tell you what I believe happened, because you need to understand what you are facing. He told them about the abyssal reaches, about the dead stars and the cold and the darkness. He told them that humanity had gone into that darkness with nothing but grief and rage and 200 million broken hearts. They did not die. He said they built in conditions that would kill any other species they built. They had no resources, so they learned to harvest energy from black holes. They had no habitable worlds, so they learned to make worlds habitable. They had no allies, so they became enough for themselves, and they had no future, so they made one out of pure will. He paused. But most importantly, he said, they remembered every day, every generation. They remembered what was done to them. They remembered who did it, and they remembered that the galaxy heard their screams and closed its doors. He looked at Ambassador Salt, who was sitting very still. 300 years of silence. Evil said that is how long they were gone, and in that silence they became something new, something the galaxy has never seen. I call them the quiet, because they learned the lesson. This chamber taught them that the galaxy only understands silence, so they became silence itself. Soul tried to speak. He tried to suggest that this was unrelated, that the frontier incidents were the work of pirates or Verath. Internal conflict shut some natural phenomenon. His voice sounded thin even to himself. Irth Val simply looked at him and said nothing. The silence said everything. After the session ended, chronicler Maven sat alone in her booth. Her recording device was still running. She had been crying again, but now she was working. She had pulled up the ancient human cultural archives files that had been sealed for centuries but never deleted. She was searching for something, though she did not know what. She found it at the bottom of a music file, buried under layers of corrupted data. A phrase. It appeared in thousands of human texts, songs, stories, speeches, letters, always the same words, repeated across centuries of human history like a heartbeat that never stopped. We do not forget, we do not forgive, we wait. Maven stared at the words, then she checked the files. Metadata. The original entries were ancient, from before the fall, but the most recent entry, the most recent modification to this file had a timestamp from 3 days ago. Someone had added a new line. It read, "The wait is over." Maven's blood went cold. She looked at the upload origin. It came from inside the Concordance's own network, from everywhere, from nowhere. They were already here. She closed the file. She sat in the dark, and somewhere in the abyssal reaches, 800 years of silence began to end. The Vierath Dominion had ruled through fear for 1,000 years. Their empire stretched across a quarter of the galaxy, held together by the simple understanding that resistance meant death. Their fleets were the largest, their soldiers were the strongest. When their weapons could crack planets open like eggs. For 1,000 years, this had been enough. It took 6 weeks to break them. The first system fell without a shot being fired. The Verkath garrison at Kareth Prime. 400 warships, 2 million soldiers, and orbital defense grid that could stop a supernova simply went dark when Concordance observers arrived 3 days later. They found the ships floating in formation. Engines cold, weapons offline. The crews were inside, alive, sitting at their stations with their hands in their laps, staring at nothing. They would not speak, they would not eat. They had to be carried off their own ships like sleeping children. The medical teams found no injuries, no toxins, no radiation. The soldiers' bodies were perfectly healthy, but something had been done to their minds. Every single one of them, when they finally spoke, said the same thing in the same flat, broken voice. I was a mother in Buenosis. I was holding my daughter. The sky turned red. I felt the heat. I felt her hand let go. They were not speaking as themselves. They were speaking as the dead, somehow impossibly. The memories of the humans who had died 800 years ago had been placed inside their heads, not as information, not as data, as experience. Every Varkath soldier at Kareth Prime had lived through the death of a human being, had felt the fire, the fear, the pain, the final darkness, had felt what it was like to die knowing that nobody was coming to help. Hi, Tyrant Kesvorl, the supreme commander of the Verkath Dominion, received the reports in his fortress on the Verkath home world. He was 9 ft tall. His body was covered in natural armor, thick plates of bone that had evolved over millions of years to stop teeth, claws, and plasma fire. He had fought in 30 campaigns. He had killed with his bare hands. He had never been afraid of anything in his life. He read the reports 3 times, then he ordered every light in his chamber turned on. He did not want to sit in the dark anymore. System after system fell, 40 in 6 weeks. The pattern was always the same. No bombardment, no invasion, no destruction. The human fleet would appear at the edge of a system. Ships of impossible design, smooth and silver, and radiating energy signatures that the Viath sensors could not even classify. And then the garrison would simply stop fighting. Weapons dissolved at the molecular level. Defense grids folded on themselves like paper being crumpled by an invisible hand. And then the memories came pouring into every Verkath mind like water through a broken dam. The soldiers did not lose their ability to fight. They lost their desire to fight. They laid down their weapons, and they wept because they had felt what it was like to be on the other end of what they had done. Every scream, every burning city, every child's last breath. They carried it all now, and the weight of it broke them. Kesvorl sent his finest fleet, the Iron Tide, 1,000 ships carrying the most battle-hardened warriors in the Dominion, to meet the human advance. The Iron Tide lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, every ship was intact, every crew alive, and every warrior was curled on the floor of their vessel, sobbing and speaking in languages they had never learned, reciting the names of human children they had never met. The High Tyrant, something that no Verkath leader had done in the history of the Dominion. He asked for help. His message to the Concordance was short: we are being destroyed without being killed. Send aid. Ambassador Salt convened an emergency session of the Concordance. The chamber was full for the first time. In decades, every seat was taken, every delegate was present, and for the first time in 800 years, the word humanity was spoken in the Grand Rotunda, not as a historical footnote, but as a clear and present threat. The debate was chaos. Species shouted at each other, some demanded military action, some demanded negotiation, some demanded that the concordance pretend this was not happening and hope it went away, which was the strategy that had worked so well the last time. Then every screen in the chamber turned on, every holographic projector, every personal device, every communication panel, all of them activated simultaneously, overriding security protocols that were supposed to be unbreakable. Static filled the chamber for a moment, and then a face appeared. It was a human. The chamber went silent in a way it had never been silent before. 4,000 species held their breath at the same time. The human was neither tall nor short. Their features were calm. Their skin had a faint shimmer to it, as if tiny circuits of light ran just beneath the surface. Their eyes glowed softly, not with menace but with something deeper, something that looked like the light of a star seen from very far away. They wore no uniform, no armor, no insignia. They carried no weapon. They spoke and their voice was quiet and clear. Members of the Concordance, my name is not important. I speak for the return. Nobody moved. 800 years ago we came to you with open hands. We offered you our music, our art, our food, our friendship. We asked for nothing but a place among you. The emissary paused. You gave us to the Verkath. You traded our homes, our worlds, our children for your own comfort. And when we came to this chamber covered in blood and begged you for help, you adjourned the session and went to dinner. Ambassador Salt opened his mouth. No sound came out. We screamed. The emissary said, "Did you know that?" What? We screamed so loud that the signal carried across 3 sectors. You heard us. Every species in this room heard us, and you turned off your receivers. The emissaries' expression did not change. There was no anger on their face. There was something far worse than anger. There was certainty. We went into the dark. We survived. We built. We grew. And every single day for 800 years, we remembered. We taught our children to remember. We carved the names of our dead into the walls of our cities so that no human would ever wake up without seeing them. We made memory into a religion and patience into a weapon. They looked directly into the chamber, and every delegate felt as if those glowing eyes were looking at them personally. We did not come back for war, the emissary said. War is what you understand. It is what you are comfortable with. You can fight a war. You can negotiate a surrender. You can sign a treaty and pretend it never happened. We are not here to give you that comfort. They leaned slightly forward. We are here for accountability. The word landed like a hammer. It echoed off the walls of the Rotunda. Every species that voted to sacrifice us will face a reckoning, not destruction, not genocide. We are not. You, for the first time, something flickered across the emissary's face. Not anger, but grief quickly controlled. We will take from you the things you value most, not your lives, your certainties, your comforts, the things you built on top of our graves. We will take them so that you understand, not in theory, not in history files, not as a story told by an old man that you ignore, but in your bones, even in your blood, what it means to lose everything. while the galaxy watches and does nothing. Ambassador Salt found his voice. It came out thin and desperate. This is an act of war. The Concordance has 10,000 warships. We will defend, Ambassador, the emissary said. Gently, we dismantled 40 Verkath systems in 6 weeks without killing a single being. Your 10,000 warships are noted. They paused. You had 800 years to apologize, 800 years to read the names of our dead, 800 years to say the words. We were wrong, you did not, and so the session is adjourned. The screens went dark, the chamber erupted, delegates screamed, alarms sounded, military commanders scrambled to their communications. Ambassador Salt shouted orders that nobody followed. Why? Because nobody knew what to do with an enemy that did not want to kill them. In the back of the chamber, Aerith Val sat very still. His light pulsed slowly. Deep and sorrowful blue. Maven pushed through the crowd to reach him. She was shaking. Elder, she said, is there any hope? The old Cathsari looked at her with ancient eyes. There is, he said, but not the kind you are looking for. The hope is in what they did not do. They had 800 years to build weapons that could unmake the galaxy. They chose not to use them. They stood before this chamber with the power of gods, and they chose words instead of fire. That is the thread by which everything hangs. He took her hand. His skin was cool and papery thin. They are not monsters, child. That is what makes them terrifying. Monsters can be killed. The righteous cannot. Maven looked at the chaos around her. Delegates fled for the exits. Military channels crackled with panicked orders. The greatest gathering of civilized species in the galaxy was falling apart like a house built on sand. And somewhere in the frontier, Fleet Commander Orish stood on the bridge of the Vigilant and stared at the mobilization orders on his screen. 10,000 warships, the largest fleet ever assembled by the Concordance. His orders were clear: intercept the human advance at the threshold of Earth and stop it by any means necessary. He was preparing his crew when a message appeared on his personal terminal, not on the military channel, not on any official frequency. On his personal device, the one that was encrypted with codes known only to him. The message read, Commander Orash, to we have read your service record, 30 years of honorable duty. You have never fired on civilians. You have never followed an unjust order without question. We respect this. Please tell your fleet to stand down. We would prefer not to embarrass them. There was no signature, no return address, no trace of how the message had arrived, or read it 3 times. Then he sat down heavily in his command chair and stared at the stars. Outside his viewport, they looked the same as they always had, but everything else had changed. He thought about what the Elder had said. He thought about a species that had been betrayed, burned, and forgotten, and had come back not with vengeance but with something worse, justice. He looked at the message one more time, then he looked at his fleet arrayed around him like a wall of metal and fire, 10,000 ships armed with the best weapons the galaxy could build. And for the first time in his career, Fleet Commander Orash was not sure that firepower was going to be enough. The reckoning came not with fire but with poetry. It began with the Veraki, Ambassador Sold species, the insectoid hiveminds who had written the original resolution to sacrifice humanity. The Veraki had never known loneliness. From The moment they hatched, every Varaki was connected to every other Varaki through a neural link that spanned their entire civilization. They shared thoughts, emotions, memories. No Varaki had ever had a private feeling. No Varaki had ever been truly alone. Their hive link was their greatest treasure, the foundation of their identity, the thing that made them who they were. On a Tuesday morning, by galactic standard time, it stopped. 4 billion Iraqi woke up in silence. The link was gone, not damaged, not weakened, gone cleanly, severed as if it had never existed. For the first time in the history of their species, every Barak was a single mind, in a single body, alone with their own thoughts, unable to hear the comforting hum of their people. The screaming started within minutes. Ambassador Salt collapsed on the floor of the Grand Rotunda during a session. He curled into a ball and made sounds that no translation system could process. Around the galaxy, Vry cities descended into chaos. Workers stopped working, ships drifted off course, children cried for the voices in their heads that were no longer there. In medical centers, Barre patients clawed at their own skulls, trying to find the connection. Alan trying to get it back. It was by every measure the cruelest thing anyone had ever done to a species, and it killed no one. Not a single Vaki died. They simply had to live for the first time with the experience of being completely and utterly alone, the way 200 million humans had felt when the galaxy abandoned them. The Thisk were next. They were a reptilian species with a gift for navigation. They had mapped more of the galaxy than any other species, and their star charts were considered the finest in existence. During the fall, the Thisk had provided the Varath with detailed navigation data for human space, every colony location, every defense position, every evacuation route. The Varath had used those charts to hunt humans across 12 star systems. Humanity's judgment was precise. Every star chart in Thisk possession, digital files, physical records, neural implants, was erased, not corrupted, not encrypted, erased completely as if the data had never existed. 4,000 years of cartographic work gone in an instant. Every Thisk navigator suddenly could not find their way home. Their ships drifted, their colonies lost contact with each other, a species that had prided itself on always knowing exactly where it was found itself completely helplessly lost. They would have to ask other species for directions. They would have to depend on the kindness of strangers to find their way back to their own worlds, just as humanity had once depended on the kindness of the Concordance and found none. The Rilari fleet commander Oresh's people had supplied warships to the Verkath during the fall. Heavy cruisers built in Rari, shipyards crewed by Rari engineers sold to the Dominion at a profit. Those ships had been used to glass human colony worlds. The Rari had made money from the death of billions. One morning, the entire Rilari military fleet, every warship, every fighter, every armed vessel in their possession was found disassembled in orbit above their home world. Every ship had been taken apart, piece by piece, and rebuilt into something else. Hospitals, schools, agricultural stations, water purification plants, each one bore a small plaque that read in the ruler language, "This is what could have been built instead." The rebuilt structures were then delivered one by one to the poorest worlds in the galaxy, worlds that the Concordance had neglected for centuries, worlds that had begged for aid and been told to wait. Every Rari warship that had helped kill humans was now saving lives on the forgotten edges of civilization, and through all of it, the severed links, the erased maps, the transformed fleets, not a single being died, not one. Humanity had the power to destroy every species that had wronged them, and they chose instead to make each one feel a specific personal loss, a loss that matched what they had done. A mirror held up to their faces, forcing them to see themselves clearly for the first time. The galaxy could not call them butchers. The galaxy could not call them monsters. The galaxy could only call them right, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. At the threshold of Orth, the Concordance fleet waited. Fleet Commander Orish stood on the bridge of the Vigilant and watched the human armada emerge from faster than light travel. There were fewer ships than he expected, perhaps 300 compared to his 10,000, but the readings on his sensor screens made his scales turn pale. Each human ship radiated energy levels that his instruments could barely measure. The smallest vessel in the human fleet was putting out more power than Orish's entire armada combined. The ships were beautiful, long and silver, with smooth curves and no visible weapons, like sculptures made for a museum. But Arish could feel the power coming off them, even through the vacuum of space. It pressed against his senses like heat from a furnace, and every weapon on every human ship was pointed slightly to the left, not aimed at his fleet, deliberately, visibly aimed away. A message without words. We could, but we choose not to. Rash thought about the message on his personal terminal. He thought about his 30 years of service. He thought about his children at home on the Relari home world, and he thought about other children, human children, who had never come home at all. He opened a channel to his fleet. All ships stand down, power down, weapons hold position. The response was immediate. Half his fleet obeyed, other half did not. Admiral Karen, commanding the heavy cruiser Iron Wrath, broke formation. The commander has lost his nerve. Krevin broadcast to the fleet, all ships with courage, follow me. We will show these ghosts what the Concordance is made of. 4,700 ships followed Krevin. They charged the human line with weapons blazing, filling the void with plasma fire and kinetic rounds. It was the largest military assault in a generation. It was magnificent and brave and completely, utterly pointless. The human fleet moved. That was the only word for it. Moved. They shifted in space like water, flowing around stones, and the Concordance weapons passed through empty space where human ships had been a fraction of a second before. Then the human ships did something that Arash could not fully understand, even when he watched the recordings later. They reached out with invisible hands, fields of energy that his scientists would spend years trying to comprehend, and they simply turned everything off. Engines stopped, weapons went cold, shields dropped, life support continued, gravity continued, lights continued. Everything needed to keep the crews alive kept working. Kind of everything else stopped. 4,700 warships became 4,700 metal boxes drifting in the dark, their crews unharmed and utterly helpless. It took 11 seconds. Disabled ships were gently pulled by tractor fields to the nearest space station. Their crews were given food, medical attention, and clean quarters. Each crew member received a recorded message that played when they woke up. We understand fear makes soldiers of us. All go home. Creon was found sitting in his command chair, staring at his dead console, completely silent. He never spoke of the battle again. Arash watched all of this from the bridge of the Vigilant. When it was over, he sat down and put his face in his scaled hands. He stayed that way for a long time, 3 days. Later, chronicler Maven left the Grand Rotunda alone. She took a small courier ship. She told no one where she was going except Val, who simply nodded and said, "Tell them I am sorry for whatever that is worth from one old man." She flew to the frontier. She flew past the last Concordance outpost and into unclaimed space. She flew for 2 days without seeing another ship, and then on the 3rd day she found them. They were waiting for her, a single human ship, small and silver, floating in the void. Like a leaf on still water, it escorted her through a passage in space that her instruments said should not exist. Fold in the fabric of reality that opened into the abyssal reaches. What she saw on the other side changed her forever. Humanity had not just survived. In the dark, they had made the dark beautiful. Cities of living crystal grew from the surfaces of rogue planets, glowing with internal light like jewels. Scattered on black velvet, stations orbited black holes, harvesting their energy through methods that Maven's scientific training told her were impossible. Gardens grew on worlds with no sun, fed by artificial light so carefully tuned that the plants did not know the difference. Children played in those gardens. They laughed and ran and chased each other, and the sound of their laughter echoed off crystal walls. And Maven had to stop walking because the beauty of it hurt. In every settlement, in every city, on every wall, and in every public space there were statues of a small blue planet. Earth, always Earth, sometimes realistic, sometimes abstract, sometimes just a blue circle, but always present. And beside the statues, names carved into crystal, names written in light, to names spoken aloud by memorial systems that ran day and night, reading the names of the dead in an endless, quiet roll call that never stopped. Every human child learned the names before they learned to read. Emissary Metaven, in a garden on a world that orbited a black hole. They were shorter than she expected. Younger looking, they offered her water and fruit and a place to sit, and they talked for hours. Then they took her to the Hall of Names. It was built inside a hollowed-out moon. The walls were made of light panels that stretched from floor to ceiling, each one displaying names in small, careful letters. The room was so large that Maven could not see the far wall. She walked for 20 minutes and did not reach the center. The names went on and on and on, billions of them, each one a person who had lived and laughed and loved and been erased from the galaxy's memory. She stood in that room and she felt the weight of it. The weight of 8.7 billion silenced voices. The weight of a crime that the galaxy had committed and then forgotten. Do you understand now? The emissary asked. Softly, they stood beside her, their glowing eyes reflecting the light of the names. Do you understand why we waited 800 years? Maven could not speak. She nodded. Not to grow strong enough to destroy you, the emissary said. We could have done that in the 1st century. We had the anger for it. We had the weapons for it. We had every reason in the universe to come back and turn your worlds to ash. They paused. We waited to grow Wise enough not to, Maven returned to the concordance 6 days later. She carried a message from the returned. She delivered it to the full assembly, her voice shaking but clear. They will stop the reckoning, she said. They will restore what they have taken. They ask only one thing. The chamber leaned forward. Read the names. Confusion. Murmurs. Ambassador Salt, pale and hollowed from weeks of lonely silence, croaked. What names? All of them. Maven said, every human who died in the fall. 8.7 billion names read aloud in this chamber before the full assembly. Every delegate must be present. Every name must be spoken. She paused to let the number settle. It will take approximately 11 years. The chamber erupted. Outrage, disbelief, protests. 11 years. 11 years of reading names. It was impossible. It was absurd. It was in the back of the chamber. Darathul began to laugh. It was a small sound, dry and crackling, and it carried no joy. But it carried something like satisfaction. The last Kathsari, who had spent his whole life trying to make the galaxy listen, laughed because humanity had finally found a way to make sure it could not look away. Maven stood in the center of the floor and waited for the noise to die down. When it did, she said, one more thing. They said to tell you that this is not punishment, it is respect. They want you to know they're dead, not as a number but as people. They want you to say their names because names are the last thing the dead have, and you took even that. The chamber was quiet, and slowly, reluctantly, inevitably, the concordance began to understand that this was not a demand they could negotiate. This was the cost of what they had done. And for the first time in its history, the galaxy was going to pay it. The first name was read on a morning that had no particular significance. There was no ceremony, no music, no grand declaration. A Palori delegate simply stood at the central podium, looked down at the list on her screen, and spoke. Abha Agarwal, age 34, Mumbai, Earth. Her voice was flat. She did not know how to pronounce the name correctly, and she did not try very hard. She read it the way someone reads a grocery list, quickly, without feeling, eager to be done. She read 19 more names in the same way, and then her time was up, and the next delegate took her place. That was how it began, with indifference. For the first few months, the reading was treated as an inconvenience. Delegates took their turns at the podium with visible resentment. Some stumbled through the names without care. Some whispered so quietly that the translation systems barely picked them up. A few delegations tried to speed through their allotted time, reading as fast as possible, turning the names into a blur of sound without meaning. The chamber was mostly empty during these sessions. Delegates sent their lowest ranking staff to fill the seats. It was a chore, a punishment to be endured and forgotten. Then something changed. It started small. A Dranathi delegate, a species with perfect memory, was reading a list of names from a city called Kyoto. He came to name Haruto Tanaka, age 12, student. And beside the name, as there was beside every name, was a single line of information, a fact, a fragment of a life. This one said, loved building model spaceships. She wanted to be an explorer. The Dr. Anath delegate stopped reading. He stared at that line for a long time. 12 years old. Wanted to be an explorer. Wanted to go to the stars. The Dranathi had been one of the first species to welcome humans to the concordance. They had given human Children tore of their ships. It was possible, likely even, that a Dranathi crew had once shown a boy named Haruta Tanaka around a starship and watched his eyes go wide with wonder. The delegate read the name again, this time slowly, this time correctly, and this time the chamber heard it. After that, things were different. The fragments of life attached to each name were short, sentence sometimes two, but they were enough. She taught music to deaf children, made the best bread in her village, was afraid of thunderstorms but pretended not to be, had just learned to walk. Each one was a window into a life that had been real, full, specific, not a number, not a statistic, a person. By the end of the first year, delegations began sending their senior members to read. By the second year, some species had trained their delegates in human languages so they could pronounce the names properly. By the third year, the chamber was full for every session, and no one spoke during the rating. They listened. The change spread beyond the rotunda. Broadcasts of the reading were transmitted across the galaxy. At first, nobody watched. Then schools began playing them in classrooms. Then families began listening at home. Generation of alien children grew up hearing the names of human dead spoken. One by one, day after day, they asked their parents what had happened, and for the first time, their parents could not lie about it because the truth was being spoken aloud in the highest chamber, the galaxy, and there was nowhere to hide from it. The phrase "never adjourn" entered the galactic language. It meant never turn away from injustice, never close the door on someone who is asking for help, never let comfort be more important than conscience. Children said it to each other on playgrounds. Politicians said it in speeches. It was carved above the entrances to kurhouses and hospitals and schools on 1,000 worlds. Urithville watched it all from his seat in the back of the chamber. He was dying. See, he had been dying for a long time. The KTH sorry were never meant to live this long, and his body had been failing for centuries. His light was dim, now barely a flicker beneath skin that had become almost entirely transparent. His bones showed through like shadows. He could no longer walk to the podium. He sat in a chair that hovered gently above the floor, wrapped in a blanket that Maven had brought him, and he listened to every name, every single one. For 11 years, he did not miss a session. Maven sat beside him whenever she could. She had changed in those years. She was no longer the young chronicler who had wept in an old man's story. She was a historian now, respected across the galaxy, known for her work documenting the fall and its aftermath. But she still sat with V-Fall. She still brought him water and adjusted his blanket and held his thin, translucent hand during the sessions. He was her friend. He was the only one who had tried to stop this, and she would not let him be alone at the end. Around the galaxy, the reckoning was undone piece by piece as the ridding continued. Vari Hive Link was restored, but the Vari chose to keep 1 hour of silence each day so they would never forget what loneliness felt like. The Thisk star charts were returned, but the Thisk added a new layer to every map, marking the locations of the 12 human worlds that had been destroyed so that anyone using their charts would see the empty spaces where life had been. The Wari military was rebuilt, but the hospitals and schools that had been made from their warships were kept running, funded by a permanent Wari contribution, and nobody suggested stopping them. On the First day of the 11th year, the reading reached its final pages. The chamber was full in a way it had never been full before. Not just delegates, citizens from every species had traveled to the rotunda for this day. Ships filled the surrounding space for light years in every direction. Billions more watched on screens across the galaxy. The silence in the chamber was total, heavy, sacred. The names were read one by one through the morning and into the afternoon, each one spoken clearly, carefully, with the weight it deserved. Maria Santos, age 81, Lisbon, Earth. Grandmother of 7, made soup for her neighbors every Sunday. James Okafor, age 26, Lagos, Earth. Firefighter ran into a burning building 3 times that day before the sky fell. Yuki Fernandez, age 4, Santiago, Earth. Loved butterflies, had never seen snow, and then at last the final name, Ambassador. Salt stood at the podium. He was not the same creature who had dismissed Vale's warning 11 years ago. The years of loneliness, those first terrible weeks without the hive link, had broken something in him and rebuilt it differently. His mandibles trembled. His 4 hands gripped the edges of the podium. His compound eyes, which could not produce tears, were clouded in a way that every species in the room understood. He looked down at the last name on the list. He had practiced it. He had practiced it 100 times in his quarters alone, saying it over and over until he could say it without his voice breaking. He had failed every time. He spoke. Lena Vasquez, age 7, Buenos Earth. His voice cracked. He stopped. The chamber waited. 4,000 species, billions of beings, an entire galaxy waited. He tried again. Lena Vasquez, age 7, Buenos Aires, Earth. Loved to sing. Her last song was a lullaby. He could not say anything else. He stepped away from the podium and stood with his head bowed, his forearms hanging at his sides, and the chamber was so quiet that the silence itself seemed to ring. Then the doors of the rotunda opened, and the emissary walked in, not as a hologram this time, in person. They walked down the central aisle with soft footsteps in every eye. In the chamber followed them. They were smaller than most of the delegates. They wore simple clothes when their skin shimmered faintly with the circuitry of light that marked the return. In their hands they carried a small object. It was a music box, old, battered, scorched. Along one edge, it had been recovered from the ruins of Earth centuries ago and carried across the dark like a holy relic. The emissary held it gently, the way one holds a sleeping bird, and they walked to the center of the floor and stopped. They opened the music box. Melody played, thin and tiny and impossibly fragile, a lullaby, the same lullaby that Lena Vasquez had sung as her world burned, the same notes that had been the last sound Earth ever made. It played in the grand rotunda, and 4,000 species listened, and many of them wept in whatever way their bodies allowed. When the melody ended, the emissary closed the box. They looked up at the assembly. "Oh, this is what you sold for." "Peace," they said. Their voice was steady but soft, a child's song, a 7-year-old girl sitting alone in the ruins of everything she knew, singing because she was afraid, and it was the only thing she could do. That was the price of your comfort. They held the music box out flat in their palms like an offering. "We have carried this for 800 years. We carried it through the dark, through the cold, through the years of grief and rage, and the long, hard work of choosing not to become what You feared we carried it because someone had to remember her, someone had to remember all of them. They looked at salt at the delegates at the chamber that had once closed its doors on a dying species. Now we give it back, not because we forgive. Forgiveness is not ours to give. It belongs to the dead. We give it back because carrying it was never your burden. It was ours, and we are ready to set it down. The emissary placed the music box on the podium. Then they straightened and addressed the full chamber. We have a proposal. Humanity will rejoin the galactic community, not as a member of the Concordance, not as a political power, a military force, or a trading partner. We will serve as the conscience of the Concordance. We will hold no territory. We will control no votes. We will command no fleets. We will simply watch. We will remember, and we will ensure that no species, not one, not ever, is sacrificed for the comfort of the many. They paused. If you accept, the reckoning ends. Everything we have taken will be fully restored. We will share what we have learned in the dark, our technology, our science, our art. And we will be your neighbors again, not your friends, not yet, perhaps not ever, but your neighbors. They paused again. If you refuse, we will return to the abyssal reaches, and you will never hear from us again. And the next time a young species comes to this chamber with open hands and a song, you will have to decide for yourselves whether to listen. The vote was called. There was no debate, no arguments, no political maneuvering. For the first time in the history of the Concordance, every single species voted the same way. 4,000 delegations, 4,000 votes, unanimous. The chamber erupted, not in chaos but in something that had no name: relief, grief, shame, hope, all of it at once, crashing together like waves from different oceans meeting in the same bay. In the back of the chamber, Ith stirred, and Maven turned to him and saw that his light was flickering. Not the slow, steady pulse she had grown accustomed to over 11 years, but an uneven, sputtering glow. She took his hand. It was cold. Elder, she whispered. Help me up, he said. She did. She supported him as he rose from his hovering chair, his body so light that it barely seemed real. He was almost translucent now, a sketch of a being drawn in fading light, but his eyes were clear. He walked to the emissary. Every step cost him visibly, but he made each one. The chamber fell silent again as they watched the oldest being in the galaxy walk toward the youngest civilization in the room. He reached the emissary and stopped. He raised one thin glowing hand and placed it against theirs, the first physical contact between a Kethsari and a human in 800 years. When I spoke, he said, his voice barely a whisper, and they ignored. The emissary nodded. You spoke and they listened. What was the difference? The emissary looked at him with those glowing eyes, and for the first time the calm certainty on their face softened into something more personal, more tender. You spoke of what we lost, they said. We spoke of what they owed. Galaxy does not hear grief, it hears debt. Val smiled. It was a small smile, tired and sad and old beyond imagining. But it was real. Then I am glad, he said, that someone finally collected. His bioluminescence pulsed one last time. It was not dim, it was not fading, it was brilliant, a burst of pure blinding gold that filled the chamber like sunrise, so bright that delegates shielded their eyes. We so warm that Maven felt it on her skin like the touch of a hand. 12,000 years of life compressed into a Single radiant moment, then it faded and the light went out and the last of the Kethsari died in the arms of the species. He had spent his final centuries trying to save. The emissary held him gently. They did not speak, they did not need to. Maven stood beside them, tears running freely down her face, and she knew with the certainty of a chronicler who has found the last line of a story what she had to do. Years later she published the book. It took her 4 years to write and a lifetime to understand. It became the most read text in galactic history, translated into every language that had ever been spoken, or thought or dreamed. Libraries devoted entire wings to it. Schools built there, teaching around it. Children memorized passages the way earlier generations had memorized the names. She called it the Elder, spoke of humanity's vengeance. The galaxy ignored the final line of the book, the sentence that would be quoted more often than any other sentence ever written in any language. Read, they did not come back to burn the galaxy. They came back to make it remember, and in remembering, the galaxy finally learned what humanity had known all along, that civilization is not measured by the power to destroy, but by the courage to bear witness. On the cover of every edition, in every language, there was a small illustration, a music box open, with notes rising from it like stars. And somewhere in the abyssal reaches, in a garden on a world that orbited a black hole, human children played among crystal flowers and laughed at the sky. Above them, carved into the wall of the garden in letters of light, was a single name. Lena Vasquez, age 7, loved to sing. The garden was called Remember.